Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Endangered Species Updates for Ohio webinar. My name is Paula Hyman, and I'm from the Ohio LTAP Center, and I'm going to be your technical support for today's webinar. Before we begin, I just want to cover a few housekeeping items. If you have questions throughout the presentation, I ask that you please type those into the questions box. Our presenters will address your questions periodically throughout the presentation. So if everyone will take just a moment, go ahead and locate that questions pod and just type a hello, hi. It's a snow day today here in Ohio. That will just let you know where it's located and how it works. This webinar is being recorded. Providing that the recording is successful, the YouTube link will be emailed to all participants and uploaded to our LTAP website. With that, I just want to thank you in advance for your participation, and I'll pass things off to Brittany Muncy, Environmental Specialist with ODOT's Ecological Section. Brittany.
Thank you, Paula. Hi, everyone. We're here to discuss how endangered species can impact our project schedule, which can also be helpful when you're scoping a consultant. First, we're going to start with a little coordination refresher, and then we're going to discuss the species that we most commonly deal with, and then we're going to follow up with some species that we don't see as much, but we still have to consider. All ODOT projects have to undergo an environmental evaluation to determine our impacts of construction in accordance with several laws and regulations. Today, we're going to focus on the laws that require ODOT to determine if our proposed project will impact any federal or state listed species. The Endangered Species Act requires all federal agencies to evaluate how our actions will impact listed species, federally listed species. It requires coordination with the Fish and Wildlife Service, and we cannot jeopardize the existence of species. It also requires us to have a federal permit if we're going to handle or survey for these species, and it prohibits take on federally listed species. The Ohio Endangered Animal Act and the plant law protect state listed species, and that requires coordination and conversations with ODNR. So in order for us to determine impacts, we have to fill out an ecological survey report. This requires a literature review and field characterization of the plant and animal communities within the project area. The literature review will help us determine if we fall within a known species buffer or within a mile of a listed animal or a half mile within a half mile of a listed plant record. Knowing this will help us determine when we should conduct our field visit and what specific habitats we should be looking for. For example, if we know that we are close to a running buffalo clover record, we should perform the survey in the early summer when the plant's in bloom, so it's easier for us to find. This brings us to our first schedule impact. Usually the field season is April 15th through October 15th because that's the growing season and that's when plants and animals are more active. If we are going to survey outside of that, then we need to be able to properly analyze the habitats there. If we are going to impact a specific resource, we have to, or listed species, we're going to have to coordinate that with Fish and Wildlife Service. This can take up to 135 days of coordination efforts. So depending on how our impacts look, that can also impact our schedule. After defining what habitats are present, we should determine if we have a potential impact to the species. So we should keep in mind that the agencies refer to an impact slightly differently. The Environmental Species Act, the Endangered Species Act definition of take is to harm, harass, pursue, hunt, shoot, wound, kill, trap, capture, or collect, or attempt to engage in any such conduct. If we are going to do any of that to a federally listed species, we have to coordinate with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and their effect calls are listed here. You'll see these abbreviated throughout the slideshow, so if you need this for reference, you can come back to it. ODNR's definition of take does not include the harm or harass portion. After making the proper effect calls, the ESR will be sent to the agencies for review. If we have no impact on a listed species, then no coordination has to occur. When we will impact a species, coordination must occur, even if it's not likely to adversely affect. So there's two types of federal consultation that we have to go through. That's informal and formal, which are based on effect calls. So if we have no effect, then no coordination is required. But if we have a not likely to adversely affect, then informal consultation is required. Informal consultation occurs most frequently, and it requires less documentation and occurs more quickly. It's essentially any conversation or correspondence with U.S. Fish and Wildlife before formal consultation begins, and it concludes when they concur with our findings. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service always errs on the side of the species, so keep this in mind. They're always going to side with the federally listed species. Formal consultation will occur if we have a may affect call, or may affect likely to adversely affect on a listed species. It begins with a biological assessment of our actions, which is completed by the project sponsor. It contains information on species status and impacts from our project, incorporating the best available data. Sometimes it's best to do a survey before we get into this because a lot of times the species is not there. But keep in mind, if you are going to do a survey, this is going to add to your schedule and your timing. It's a long document and it takes a long time to compose. After it's written, we submit that to Fish and Wildlife Service, and they have 45 days to review it and determine if it's complete or not. And they can request more information within these 45 days. Usually it's a back and forth conversation, so it's not like you're going to be sidelined by what other information they're going to need. They will talk to you throughout the whole process. After our biological assessment is determined complete, the Fish and Wildlife Service will write a biological opinion in response. And they have 90 days to do this. So our 45 days and now our 90 days, so we're at 135 days so far. Their biological opinion will determine if our actions will jeopardize the species. If not, then the project can continue. But if they determine our actions will jeopardize the species, the project can't continue without changes that minimize our impacts. They give us reasonable and prudent measures, and they're required, things such as mussel relocations and monitoring. In their biological opinion, they can also include conservation recommendations, but those aren't required yet. They're really good for the species, so we should consider those. Now, if you have an emergency project or unforeseen circumstances, there is a streamlined process, so it won't take as long, but that shouldn't be depended on. It's really stressful on both or all agencies involved because it's a very sped up procedure. But things like the bank collapse at Vermin Road, or when a new species record's found in a stream that we didn't think it would be there, in those circumstances, we can get coordination done more quickly. Wait, did I say that altogether this takes 180 days? So 180 days for the entire process to wrap up formal consultation. We went into this process when the Indiana and Northern long-eared bats were listed. We worked with Fish and Wildlife Service through formal consultation, and it allowed us to develop a 10-year programmatic agreement. They looked at our entire program and they separated out our actions into those that are likely and unlikely to affect the bat species, which allowed us to streamline our coordination. It implemented a batch concurrence consultation approach where Fish and Wildlife Service already agreed that many of our actions have no adverse impacts. So they didn't require to analyze those projects individually. Things like our culvert replacements, they didn't want to see every culvert replacement because it's very unlikely that we're going to impact the species with those. The batch coordination decreases our coordination efforts to 14 days. So this happens very frequently. Again, it's the fastest coordination out there, but the entire state is within the range of the Indiana and Northern long-eared bats, and it's divided into two management sections, and that's based on forest cover. So the Eastern Management Unit has 30% or higher forested cover, and the Western has less than that 30%. The Programmatic Agreement and the formal consultation with Fish and Wildlife Service also gave us definitions for bat habitat that we should be looking for. Remember that Fish and Wildlife Service considers impacts to habitat as impacts to the species as well. So the programmatic, so these definitions are here. Suitable wooded habitat, everyone's pretty familiar with that. It's any tree area that's half acre or larger that contains potential roosts, or any patch of trees with these characteristics that is within 1,000 feet of a larger stand of suitable wooded habitat or potential maternity roost tree. Potential maternity roost trees are larger trees that bats will be in when they have their babies latched to their backs. They're larger trees. They have to be 16 inches round or larger, and they have to have solar exposure, and they should have peeling bark and crevices for the bats to get in there. I do want to mention that these are trees that are further than 100 feet from the edge of pavements, and we have to make sure that we're going to ID these if we're going to impact them. And they also told us that bats roost in bridges. So bridges over 20 feet in length over waterways will have to be inspected for bat use at the time of the eco survey. The ESR isn't complete unless this is done. Recently, we've been seeing a lot of notes saying that the bridge was too high to visually inspect, and this is still incomplete. We use binoculars, or we look for other evidence of bats such as guano or staining around the cracks and on the ground. You can see in the picture to the bottom right, we couldn't see the bats in there, but you can tell that they're using them from the staining. And then the picture on the lower left, you can see how that staining occurs. So here are some of the things that we should think about when we're going to impact suitable wooded habitat. If we are impacting less than 1/10 of an acre, all within 100 feet of the edge of pavement, we have to look if there's roosting characteristics or not. If there are no roosting characteristics, then that's not an impact to the species. But if there are roosting characteristics, that is an impact, and it goes on our batch concurrence. If we're impacting greater than 1/10 of an acre, then also, but all suitable wooded habitat is still within 100 feet of the edge of pavement, that also needs to be sent for batch concurrence. And then if we are impacting suitable wooded habitat further than 100 feet, we need to separate this into groups. These groups are suitable wooded habitat that will be impacted within 100 feet of the edge of pavement, then further than 100 feet, 50 feet, or within 50 feet of a perennial stream, and then from 100 to 300 and anywhere past 300. We also need to document any potential maternity roost trees. And then if we find a bridge that does have bats, we have a few options. We can work outside of their roosting, or of their summer roosting dates. So we could do the bridge work between October 1st and March 31st, or we can block out areas to preclude bats from using that area the next roosting season. If we don't do this, or if we answer yes to any of these questions, then formal consultation must occur. So if you're cutting in the summer, or if you're removing more than 1/4 of an acre beyond 100 feet, but within 100 feet of a perennial stream, or impacting any potential maternity roost tree that's beyond 100 feet from the edge of pavement, or this is where those management areas come into account. If we're impacting an acre of suitable wooded habitat beyond 100 feet in the Western Management Unit and 2 acres in the Eastern Management Unit, if you answered yes to any of those, then formal consultation is required and mitigation is also required. Because we have that programmatic agreement, formal consultation on bats only takes 30 days and it's done by letter, and you don't have to write in any additional report. Mentioning the mitigation, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service recently updated their in lieu fee program. The new cost is $9,845 per acre. If we assume presence and we're paying for mitigation, that's the fastest. It'll only take 30 days, but it's likely the most expensive. And then any sort of mitigation ratio we have to take into account greatly increases our prices. A lot of projects that we see these impacts on are bike trails, which are great. We love bike trails, but keep this in mind when we are going through the coordination that it might take a little bit longer and there might be some mitigation required. If your project does, again, if your project exceeds these limits or we're cutting in the summer, if we don't readily want to pay mitigation, there's several options. We can survey. If we only have a couple of trees, we can do an emergent survey. That's where a biologist will sit under the tree and at dusk and look if there's bats using it, if they emerge. We can do an acoustic survey, which records bat noises, or we can do a mistnet. Currently, though, we cannot mistnet because of COVID, but the survey procedure drapes nets around the area to catch bats and then identify the species. This is probably going to take longer, and it does require money because of the cost of surveys, but it might be beneficial depending on the cost of mitigation to the cost of the survey and how many acres of suitable wood habitat we're impacting. Another option is for us to wait for more detailed plans. Commonly, environmental stuff is looked at in the beginning of the planning process, and a lot of times there aren't good plans. So if we wait for better, more developed plans, we can kind of bring in our impacts a little bit, and that might lower the amount of acres of suitable wooded habitat we're impacting. So you could always wait. In addition to the 2 federal bat listings, there has also been 2 bats listed as state endangered this year. They are the tricolor bat and the little brown bat. They're also under review with Fish and Wildlife Service, and that should occur within the next 5 years. So we'll see if they will be federally listed. But Ohio, every county in Ohio is within the range of these species, and the write-ups are really similar to the federal bats. But I do want to point out that the tricolor bats roost in foliage, so trees with leaves contain roosting habitat. If we commit to winter cutting dates, then we're not going to have an impact on state listed bat species. We haven't had to coordinate this through ODNR yet, but if we're going to cut in the summer or if we do a survey instead, then the bat information will also have to go to ODNR. So we're not sure how they're going to respond yet. This is a lot of words on this slide, but I put it in here so you can copy this when you're writing your ESRs as into the habitat descriptions. And so you have an example of how to write up impacts for habitat for these bats. But that is everything on bats, and Megan will continue with the mussel surveys.
All right, I'm trying a new set of earphones and microphone, so can everyone hear me? Okay. Next slide, Brittany. I'm Megan Michael. I'm an environmental specialist here at ODOT. I work with Brittany. My main specialty is mussels, so I'm going to talk about mussels and mussel surveys and how they impact ODOT projects. So for a couple overview slides, because I know some of you, especially consultants know what mussels are, but some people probably don't know that we have freshwater mussels or have never seen one in the state. Our freshwater mussels are bivalves that live in our streams, rivers, and lakes. They are found worldwide, but the most diverse populations of mussels are in North America, especially Eastern North America. We have 16 known species in Ohio. The adults, like clams or oysters in the ocean, they live buried in the stream bottoms, and they filter feed on zooplankton, algae, and bacteria. Unlike some of the ocean ones, the freshwater mussel larvae are parasitic on fish. They're not free swimming. So they latch onto fish, and then the fish take them upstream or downstream or wherever they swim, and then they drop off the fish, and that's how they get around. Next slide. This shows the life cycle of a mussel where the adults breed. They form the larvae, which are called glochidia. The glochidia attach to fish, and then after they have matured, they drop off into the substrate in random places. And if they are lucky and they've dropped off into a good area, they grow up to be adult mussels. Because the mussels have to latch these onto fish, they have several different ways that they like to use to get their babies onto the fish. Next. So these are the three main ways they use. The picture in the upper left corner is of one of the muckets or plain pocketbook. And they use these mussel lures, which are part of the inside of the mussel, and they look like fish, and they even flip around and look like a sick fish. And bass and bluegill will come up and bite these, and when they bite the lure, the glochidia spray out onto the fish, and that's how it gets infected. Some other mussels, if you look to the top right, make these little packets of glochidia that look like worms and midges and bugs. And fish come along, especially darters and some of the bottom feeding fish, and snack on these and get infested with the glochidia. The bottom are a really specialized type of mussel in the Epioblasma genus. And what they do is actually trap fish. They lure the fish in, and when the fish touches the mussel shell, it clamps shut on their nose, and then will basically spray the fish's face full of glochidia. So they have a very interesting lifespan, and because of this, or life cycle, and because of this life cycle and being dependent on fish, it's part of why they can become rare if their habitats are being impacted. Next. So why are mussels important? Why are these agencies regulating mussels? Why do we care about them? For humans, they're important for water filtration and for other things that live in the streams. They remove silt, they remove nutrients and algae and diatoms from the water column. They are very good for substrate stability. They act like a rock in the stream. They have a big muscular foot that pulls them down into the substrate. In that bottom picture, there's actually 2 or 3 mussels in that picture. Most of them are buried all the way up, and then one is partially visible. The middle picture, the mussel is visible right in the center of the picture, and it's just the slit, and then the top one's pretty easy to see. So you can see when you're surveying for these, they're not easy to find. They also offer food for other animals in the ecosystem, such as muskrats and minks, sometimes fish, crayfish. And a lot of animals use their shells, especially the empty shells, for homes. Next. The reason these animals are becoming increasingly rare is they're under many, many threats. The biggest threat probably is habitat destruction. This is from dams, both low-head dams and the big dams that are used for reservoirs. Stream channelization, in-stream construction, and When you have too much siltation in the stream, you can get an embedded channel where the bottom becomes like concrete or gets clogged up with mud. There's also water quality degradation, point source, non-point source, acidification, and siltation. And we also have issues with invasive species and disease. Mussel die-offs are becoming more common, and a lot of them are caused by viruses. The laws that protect mussels are the same laws that Brittany has already discussed. The Endangered Species Act, our state endangered animal law. We also have a specific Ohio revised code that states that no person shall take mussels or sell mussels taken in this state. And that applies to all mussels, not just listed species. And this was to prevent poaching of mussels for the shell industry to make cultured pearls. The Section 404 of the Clean Water Act also prohibits impacts to shellfish beds. And so if you're getting a permit, impacting mussel beds is not allowed under that. Next. In Ohio, the Fish and Wildlife and ODNR have devised an Ohio mussel survey protocol. This is a standard set of protocols for performing mussel surveys, when you have to perform them, and what the results, how long the results are good for, what methods you use. It was based on the West Virginia Mussel Survey Protocol. So we use these set of protocols to determine if mussels are present or absent in the project area. We use these protocols when we have to move mussels out of the construction area, and set survey dates from May 1 to October 1. So you need to make sure if a mussel survey needs to occur in the stream in the project area that it is done between those dates. The survey protocol also divides streams into multiple categories based on size and if they have endangered species. So most of the streams in Ohio are in the unlisted or group 1 group. These are small streams or small rivers with no known federally listed species. So this would be like Blacklit Creek, Upper Cuyahoga River, like small to medium sized channels, no known federal species. Group 2 are small streams and rivers with known population of federally listed species. Probably the best known in central Ohio are the Big and Little Darby Creeks. Group 3 are the large rivers with no known federally listed species, like the Maumee River and some parts of the Ohio River. And Group 4 streams are large rivers with known populations of federal species, such as the Scioto River south of Columbus, the Muskingum River, and parts of the Ohio. Next. So the mussel survey protocol for Group 1 and unlisted stream. If the stream is larger than 5 square miles, it requires some level of survey work. During the eco survey report, any biologist that is pre-qualified by ODOT to do aquatic surveys can go out and determine if mussels are present or absent in the project area. The reconnaissance survey just surveys the general stream vicinity from 400 feet down to 200 feet upstream of the project area to determine if there are live mussels, fresh dead shells, only weather dead, or no shells at all. And that information is put in the eco report. If mussels are found during the reconnaissance survey, then a mussel salvage survey is performed right before construction. And that is where mussels are taken out of the actual construction area and some buffer areas so that they don't get crushed during construction. The recons, like I said, can be done by aquatic ecologists. The salvage surveys have to be done by a state permitted malacologist that has passed the mussel test and has a state permit to handle mussels. Next. For Group 3 streams, they are way too big to do a recon survey on. You can't see the bottom in most of them. A lot of them are so big you would have to dive. So we assume presence of mussels at the time of the ecological survey. Right before construction, similar to the Group 1 streams, they conduct a mussel salvage before construction and move the mussels out of the way. Next. For Groups 2 and 4 streams, at the time of eco survey, the biologist that is doing this work needs to determine if the federally listed species is present within the project area. And the methods outlined in the Group 2 and 4 surveys in the Ohio Mussel Survey Protocol require something called a Phase 1, Phase 2 survey to determine if the federal species are present. This involves either cells or transects in a long stretch of stream, and if high density or high diversity mussel populations are found, it also requires excavation of the stream bottom to try to find deeply buried mussels, baby mussels, and a lot of our federal species tend to bury pretty deeply, so it's a better way of detecting them. If no federal species are found during the Phase 1, Phase 2 survey, the project kind of proceeds similar to a 1 and 3 stream. If right before construction, we do a salvage survey of any mussels within the project area. If a federal species is found, these projects require formal consultation. As Brittany mentioned, this is the coordination that takes 180 days. Our most common formal consultations are for mussels. It's definitely by far the most common formal consultation. Even though they're pretty rare, we do less than 1 or 2 a year. So for most of our projects don't follow this. After formal consultation, we will do a mussel salvage on the stream, but other AMMs or mitigation or monitoring may be required. The most common mitigation required for federal species of mussels is to go back out a year after the mussels are moved and see if the federal mussel is still alive. And we did that this year on Vermin Road. Surveys on any Group 2 or 4 stream have to be performed by a federally permitted malacologist. So how do these mussels affect your project timing? All surveys have to be performed between May 1 and October 1. So if your stream is over 5 square miles, it's important to time the mussel survey between those dates. If it is a small stream and it's fairly close to the survey dates, generally ODNR will grant a waiver. It is very much more difficult to get a waiver from Fish and Wildlife. Someone had asked the question, is the 5 square mile drainage, is this for the drainage at the project area or at the mouth of the stream? It is the drainage area at the site of the project. So usually when we're doing eco survey reports, part of it is to get the drainage area at the point of impact. If the drainage area at the point of impact is 5 square miles or greater, it requires the mussel survey. The size of the stream in its entirety doesn't really matter. The recon surveys on the unlisted and Group 1 stream should be done during the eco survey. If not, the project sponsor will have to commit to a mussel salvage prior to construction. At least half of recon surveys come back as negative. So it's much better to have the recon survey done because it only takes a half an hour to an hour. And to have that data, it's a lot more cost effective than going out and doing the salvage survey, which tends to be more like $10,000. If you have a Group 2 or 4 stream, the Phase 1, Phase 2 hybrid survey needs to be done prior to coordination, so during the eco survey period. If we don't have that Phase 1, Phase 2 hybrid survey, we can't make an effect call, or we have to assume the federal mussel is there. And that really increases costs and it really increases the time for coordination if we have to assume the federal mussel is there. Similar to like the recon survey, our Phase 1, Phase 2 hybrid surveys don't usually find the federal mussel in the project area. They're federally listed because they're rare. So it tends to eliminate a lot of sites to do the survey during the eco survey. The salvage surveys are generally done during the same field season if the project starts in the late summer or fall, or if it's going to start in the spring or early summer, we do it the field season prior. So if you have projects where it's going to impact a stream over 5 square miles at the site, make sure you're scheduling field work during the appropriate season. If you have a Group 2 or 4 stream, make sure you're leaving time in the schedule for additional coordination. Leave a good buffer just in case you do find the federal mussel. If the stream or the project won't impact federally listed species, the coordination is 30 days. So this can be pretty timely, but of course, if you do find federal mussels, then it's about 180 days. And after a salvage survey is done, we need to get response from ODNR and Fish and Wildlife before the project can proceed. I would leave up to 2 weeks for that, although generally, at least with ODNR, they answer back the same day. Next. Does anyone have any further questions regarding mussels and mussel surveys? All right, I'm going to turn this back over to Brittany to finish up the talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. Another thing that will, our literature review will let us know is if we fall within a bald eagle buffer. ODNR was maintaining a list of active nests. I don't think it's being maintained any longer, but that list is still available. And if you fall within a buffer, then our construction activities and our commitments that we're willing to make will help determine if we're going to adversely affect the species or not. If we are within a half mile of a bald eagle nest and we're blasting, again, depending on the commitments that we're willing to make, we're either going to have may affect not likely, or we are going to have a may affect not likely to adversely affect, or we're going to have likely to adversely affect. So again, if we are likely to adversely affect federally listed species like the bald eagle, then we're going to have to go through that formal consultation process. If the nest is visible, or if work is done within 160 feet of the nest, again, we have those same effect calls, and depending on our commitments, we'll change our effect calls. But if the nest is not visible and we're not blasting, then we will have no effect on the species. If we are going to have the likely to adversely affect call, then we need to go through the biological assessment and biological opinion process. Coordination is around 90 days, and they can require us to monitor it for up to 2 years. So again, that's extra time and money that will go into our project and our project schedule that we need to consider. The nesting season is January 15th through August 15th. So if we can work outside of those dates, that's great. We just had a project like this in Hancock County. They did a wonderful job, and the birds came back. You can see a picture of them right there. We'll also have to know if we're within an eastern Massasauga rattlesnake hexagon. Habitat for these snakes are shallow water wetlands, including fens, bogs, marshes, wet prairies, and grasslands, and then the marges of ponds and lakes and ditches, or any other wetland that can sustain burrowing crayfish. And in the winter, the Massasaugas use the crayfish burrows to overwinter. These wetlands are not often indicated on wetland maps, so when you're doing your field survey, you need to make sure you're looking at the area for wetlands. If you do need an Eastern Massasauga rattlesnake survey, ODNR maintains a list of approved herpetologists for this. So again, that will have to go into your scheduling, and I think it takes about 12 weeks to do a survey. If we are assuming presence and we're going to impact those areas, then we will have to coordinate that with Fish and Wildlife Service. And we also have to take into account the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, which tells us that it's unlawful to harm, hunt, pursue, capture, take, all of that, any migratory bird or nest or egg Most of what we deal with is colony nesters or the peregrine falcon. If we do find a colony nest under a bridge, then we can either construct outside of the nesting season. So that would depend on what bird's nesting there. We can block the nesting sites to prevent nesting the following year and do the work then. If we are impacting a peregrine falcon nest, we cannot work within 100 feet of the nest during the nesting season. And if we cannot accomplish any of our work with any of those commitments, then we will have to get a take permit and go through formal consultation with Fish and Wildlife Service. We also have to do plant surveys, which should be conducted during bloom time. If you're like me, I'm not the best botanist, so the flower is very helpful when you're identifying a plant. So make sure when you're out there during your field visit that you allow, or your time frame allows your field work to be within that blooming season. Federally listed species are broken down by county, and you can see the bloom dates right there listed for you. And then state listed species, we have to survey if we're within a half mile of a listed plant record. When we do impact these, we have not impacted a federally listed species yet, but that would require formal consultation. But when we do impact state listed species, we've had ODNR request us to transplant them or collect seeds and disperse them in different areas. Again, this takes time and money. So we need to make sure that we're out there during bloom time. I've also recently had a project where there was a listed fish within within a mile of the construction limits. So ODNR requested in-stream work restrictions, so we couldn't do work when that fish was spawning. And there are also instances where turtle or snake surveys are required. That's usually separate from the ESR, so we can coordinate the ESR first and get ODNR's opinion about that. But the survey itself can take up to 12 weeks. So allow that time in your schedule that you can't start construction until that survey is completed and wrapped up. Here are some federally listed species updates. The Kirkland's warbler was removed from the federal list and the state list. The hellbender and Lake Erie water snake are both removed from the federal listed species, but the round hickory nut and the long solid were added. These are mussels, so they increase the number of group 2 and 4 streams within the state of Ohio. Again, as Megan stated, those surveys take longer and require more of an effort. So if you're going to impact one of those rivers, we need to keep that in mind. And then the Sloan's crayfish was removed from the state listed species, but the tricolor and little brown bats were added. And then yesterday they came out with the Monarch listing. It says to be determined here, but they decided that it could be listed but is precluded, so it's not listed yet. So currently we don't have to do anything, but they can list that at any time. Megan, are you at your desk? Do you want to talk about the Monarch?
Again, I've been working on the Monarch conservation, like the CCAA for ODOT, so I'll discuss what's going on with the Monarch. As Brittany noted, it was considered warranted for listing, which means it deserves to be listed. It's rare enough to be listed, but it's precluded, which means they have higher priority species that they have to get through first before they can get to the Monarch. Right now, they are looking at their federal funding year of 2024 or 2025 to list it. And since it's already been found to be warranted, at that point they will do a status assessment, and if it has stayed the same or become more rare, they will go ahead and list it at that point. If it has been recovered from then due to some of the state and local conservation projects around the country, they may decide it's not warranted at that point. So right now we're kind of in a holding pattern to at least 2024. When the Monarch was proposed for listing, ODOT joined the nationwide CCAA that covers federal aid projects on ODOT system and any of our maintenance projects on ODOT's on our state routes and interstate routes. The CCAA would not cover large projects with new right-of-way on our system, and the CCAA does not cover local roads and county roads, regardless of if they have federal money or not. And this is because the managers of those roadways are not ODOT, so we wouldn't be able to tell, they would have to go into the CCAA themselves as a county or a township if they wanted those protections. The benefits of being in the CCAA is that we are already doing a bunch of the conservation mowing, and we have planted pollinator plots. So as long as we continue to do our conservation mowing on the back slopes where we only mow once a year, and we keep our pollinator plots up and follow the rest of our conservation recommendations, which were things that we were mostly doing anyway, Fish and Wildlife, if the species is listed, cannot come back and give us more restrictions on our small projects and our maintenance. And we wouldn't have to coordinate every time we mowed, because if it was listed and you went out and mowed a patch of milkweed where the caterpillars are living, you could easily kill the species. And that's would be a Section 9 violation, or if it had federal dollars, it'd be a Section 7 violation. So ODOT has been using the CCAA as kind of an insurance policy that as long as we continue to do our conservation measures that we were already doing or are a lot easier to plan for, we will not be hit with additional restrictions on our mowing and other maintenance practices and on what we're normally doing on our federal aid small projects. So counties and townships have gotten a reprieve for at least 3 or 4 years. So it's definitely something to look into. If the species is listed, how would it impact your program? How would it impact your maintenance? How often are you mowing over milkweeds during the year? It's definitely something to consider, how that would be coordinated if the species does become listed. Brittany?
And here's just a slide of all the time frames that we talked about today. Again, your field season's typically April 15th through October 15th. Your wetland delineations should usually fall within them, but they allow an extra month on both ends. We should be clearing trees October 1st through March 31st. If we fall within a swarming buffer, then we clear trees between November 15th to March 15th. If you're doing a survey for bats, that's May 15th through April 15th. I feel like that's wrong. I think that should be August. This April. Oh, well. And then if we need to do bridge work on bridges that have bats, we should do that outside of the summer roosting season. Mussel surveys May 1st through October 1st, and plant surveys during bloom time, please. And again, we should allow up to 180 days for coordination with Fish and Wildlife Service. That's the last slide. If you have any questions, please type them into the chat box.
All right, this is Megan. How we find mussels when they are mostly buried is that the pictures, a lot of times you can see a little tiny bit of the mussel, like the little aperture in their siphons where they're drawing in water and spitting out water. Obviously, like the mussel on the top is pretty easy to see, and most people could find that one. The two on the bottom would be harder. When you've done mussel surveys for a long time, it gets a lot easier to see those little slits and then that, you know, how that aperture looks. You get a lot better at looking for them. But we also use our hands to feel around in the substrate. Mussels feel very different than rocks. They feel like fingernails almost. They've got kind of a protein shell on the outside of their mussel shell. So they feel very slippery and very different than rocks. And you can feel them with your fingertips. So a lot of mussel surveys, you spend hands and knees digging through the substrate, and once you find a mussel, you can pull it out of the substrate, and we keep them in bags until we've collected all the mussels. I know a lot of project sponsors feel that mussel surveys are very expensive, especially like this. Even the smaller streams are usually in the $10,000 range, and they can go up to $100,000 or more for really large rivers. But when you think of someone having to pretty much crawl on the substrate and feel the entire bottom with their fingers to find mussels that are buried, you can see how that survey work can take a lot of time. The slideshow will be available as a PDF, and Paula is going to email it out to everyone who is registered, and it'll also have a link to the video once they get it all processed. All right, it looks like there aren't any other questions, so we can wrap up the talk. Thank everyone for listening in, and I hope you found this informative.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Megan, for your help.
Oh, someone did pop in a question real quick. How do you keep mussels alive during the time they are removed from the substrate and returned? They stay in mesh bags, and we keep them sitting in the stream and in the water. And then we'll haul the mesh bags up to where they are going to be moved to, and we place them back onto the substrate and let them bury in. Sometimes we also use laundry baskets if we have a lot of mussels, and we just push those down in the stream so the water flows through. All right.
All right, thank you everyone for joining. We're going to go ahead and wrap up. Again, I will send out an email with the link to the YouTube video once it is processed, and also with a PDF copy of today's presentation. Thank you so much for your time, and have a great day.